So this video is about getting your sexuality back when you're in recovery.
The Sex Talk.
Today I'm going to answer a question from somebody that actually asked a question on one of the most popular videos on this channel, which is my meth and fetishes video, where we talk about how methamphetamines, specifically crystal meth, speed, even today's people are misusing Adderall and things like that, how they can affect or sort of encourage you to engage in higher risk behavior. So in my last video about sexual fetishes and meth use, we addressed methamphetamines specifically and how they can increase risky sexual behavior. And then they can also increase sexual behavior in general. But typically what happens, because methamphetamine is an upper, it increases your heart rate, and increasing heart rate is actually one of the things that is recommended. You're getting that sexual desire, you're trying to ramp it up a little bit. Emily Nagoski, in her book Come As You Are, she talks about responsive sexual desire versus spontaneous sexual desire. And so spontaneous sexual desire is kind of what happens when you use crystal meth. Spontaneous sexual desire is getting turned on, getting aroused, wanting to be sexual, wanting to be intimate, sort of spontaneously. It just sort of happens. Responsive sexual desire, on the other hand, Nagoski suggests, is for people who, or it doesn't have to be people, it could be just situations. Some people tend to be more on that side, but responsive folks, they have to sort of, it takes a little bit more to get them into the mood. So just a piece of stimuli is not going to all of a sudden make them aroused and want to have intercourse or want to get freaky. It takes them a little time, maybe context, the mood that they're in, the situation that they're in, the person that they're with. Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel sexy in their own body? So that sort of describes responsive sexual desire. So what happens when you take drugs? That responsiveness may become more spontaneous. So you're seeing sort of this shift in the way that you respond sexually. It becomes quicker, faster, easier, probably because you're less inhibited when you've ingested any sort of drug. It can be opiates, it can be crystal meth, it can be alcohol, it can be marijuana, it can be Adderall, it can be cocaine, it can be mushrooms, LSD, MDMA. The list goes on about, in terms of the types of drugs that people are using, that you're using, and how it affects your arousal system, your sexual desire, so on and so forth. And most of the times I would say that it reduces any sort of breaks that you have, any blocks that you have. It decreases and makes you become less inhibited. So you're more likely to say yes, you're more likely to seek it out, you're more likely to have a lot more sex, and with that comes the increase of having a lot more risky sexual interactions. So someone wrote on the meth and sexual fetishes video, which I will link here so that you can all come watch it, what happens when I get clean from meth? This person was introduced to methamphetamines by a partner for the purpose of sex. because meth is actually very commonly used for that purposes, because it just makes people want to fuck like rabbits. And again, it borders on dangerous a lot of the times, because you're more likely to do it just because you need to. You feel like this urgency to do it, and it doesn't matter who it's with, how it's done, protection. A lot of that stuff may go out the window when you are under the influence of not just methamphetamines, but of almost any drug, because as I mentioned earlier, it decreases the inhibition. So you're more likely to just engage in this type of behavior in a way that you may have or would not have otherwise. So what happens when you get off the drug? And this is actually something that I've talked a lot about, but I don't know if I've done a video on it on here, so I'm going to do one today. And so this video is about getting your sexuality back when you're in recovery from the drugs, because I heard this a long time ago and it really, really struck me, and I really, really find it to be true. A lot of people engage in drug use because it lowers the inhibitions, and a lot of the inhibitions that people have are around sex and dating. And you see this most commonly in the bars, in the bar scenes, like, you know, going to the bar scenes. Like, I grew up I was in my 20s, I lived in San Francisco, and in my 30s, I lived in Los Angeles, and there was a term for bars that were strictly bars and nightclubs that were strictly for picking up. They're called meat markets. And you knew that if you went there, you were probably going to get picked up. It was a great place to find people to hook up with, maybe meet a partner. If not, you could probably most likely find a sexual partner there. And what are everybody doing at these meat market nightclubs, bars? They're drinking. First and foremost, they're drinking, and then on top of that, they're probably engaging in other drugs. So you know that as a society, we've sort of allowed this to happen. We don't talk about sex much. We don't give people the tools when it comes to sex and relationships and dating. Yet we allow this sort of inebriation when it comes to finding a partner, finding a mate, hookup culture. The drink bone is connected to the hookup culture bone 100%. And what does alcohol do? For anyone that's tried it, and I would say that's a majority of people in our culture, we know that alcohol decreases inhibition. Side note, I made a documentary film called Temples and Brothels, and one of the things that we did in my film was we went to the brothels in Nevada, which are legal. They're legal brothels in Nevada, and you can pay to have sex, right? You can pay a woman or man, I believe those exist too, to actually have sex with you. And why are brothels safer than going to a bar? Because the people that work at the brothels, they are required to get tested weekly. They use safe sex. They engage in consensual relationships. Going to a brothel is safer than picking up people at a bar. That's one of the tenets of my film that I made. I'll also link to that in this video. So what's happening is we're going to bars to drink a little, to loosen up our inhibitions so that we can go home and fuck, so that we can engage in sexual relations, intimate relations, romantic relationships, because the bottom line is we all, not 100% of us, but a large portion of us have social anxiety around sex and dating. And so when people are developing drug addictions, a lot of times it is around sex and dating. Addiction breeds on our insecurities, right? Addiction breeds on our fears. if we have a fear of abandonment, if we have a fear that we're not good enough, we're not good looking enough, we're not funny enough, we're not skinny enough, we're not cool enough, people don't like us, any of those things, guess what? A drug can fix. Getting high on meth makes you feel like you're on top of the world. Getting high on cocaine, taking MDMA, drinking alcohol, doing a little bit of smoking a little bit of marijuana or taking some THC relaxes you. All of these things only help us when it comes to the sex department, when it comes to hooking up, meeting other people, getting this desire that we all have of connection and feeling good and pleasure. We all want to feel pleasure. It all comes down to we all want to feel pleasure. And we have become a society that's so unable, so lacking in permission to feel pleasure that we've turned to drugs to do the job for us, to give us that permission to drop our guard, to not be inhibited anymore. We have allowed drugs into our life because that's what they do. They allow us to do all of that. So, some of us develop addictions. I have a lot of people in my life who have developed severe addictions around it. It's not all sex related, but it has a big part in why people develop addictions, because when you take the drugs, you feel sexier, you feel more attractive, you can talk to people more, you feel better about yourself. It takes away that stuff that clogs up our brain so much of the time. But it also has so many other ramifications. It can debilitate us financially. It can take away our jobs, take away our livelihood, take away our family. It is destructive and can destroy the ones that we love, destroy ourselves, destroy our bodies, destroy our healths. Like, the ramifications of developing an addiction to a substance they're so great that at some point, most people who develop some sort of dependency on a drug decide, I must get off of this drug. But that drug has now been completely intrinsically tied to your sexuality. So what do you do next? How do you get your sexuality back when now you're clean and sober? And everything that you were doing when you were on drugs, you now have to clear away from your plate because they are associated with the drug use. So how do you get your sexuality back? Well, that's the $1 million question. And there is no short answer, but I want you to know that you can. And so this is what I kind of responded in the comment, is that I let the person that asked the question, I let them know that you can heal from this. But first of all, you're going to have to give yourself time, because now the sexuality is tied, it's like in bed with your addiction. They're sleeping together now. So we've got to break them up. We've got to break up your addiction and reclaim your sexuality away from your addiction. And that's 100% doable. I am a huge fan of narrative therapy. Narrative therapy means we need to rewrite our stories. In the process of sex therapy, what I would have you do is I would have you do a lot of writing, excavating, separating your sexuality so that you can learn to own it and embrace it without the drug. You don't need the drug. You thought you did. It helped you for a little bit, but then it fucked up your life. So here we are today. You're trying to be clean and sober. You want to be in this relationship, but every time you try to have sex with your partner, you recoil, because you've only had really good sex most of the time while you were inebriated or under the influence. You were sexing under the influence. And so what you really need to do is reclaim your sexuality. Your sexuality should not be tied to your drugs. They need to get a divorce. Just like you're getting a divorce from your drug, your sexuality also is coming with you in the divorce. The drug doesn't get to keep it. In fact, the drug doesn't get to keep anything because they were the abusive partner. And you're going to make sure that they go away for a very, very long time, i.e. forever. And you're going to get your sexuality. You're going to win it. You're going to win it back in the custody battle. And it's going to take some time. First, you're going to have to rebuild your trust with your sexual relationship with yourself. So your sexuality doesn't trust you. Your sexuality is like your child that you sort of mistreated when you were under the influence because you gave all of your power to the drug. And so the drug was controlling that child, your sexuality, and telling your sexuality what to do. Well, now your sexuality needs to learn to trust you, and you need to learn to build that trust with your sexuality. So that's step number one. You're going to start from the very beginning. You're going to start from all of the messages that you learned as a child. We're going to go back all the way back to your childhood. And I'm also going to link to my course, my Ultimate Sexual and Freedom course, which sort of helps you rebuild your sexuality from day one. You're going to go back to your childhood, and we're going to rebuild that sexuality. You're going to uncover all of the messages that you were taught about sex and sexuality. We're going to talk ad nauseum about what you thought about when you masturbated. What comes up for you? Do you allow yourself to have hour-long masturbation sessions, or do you rush through it and then feel guilty about it afterwards? We're going to talk about all of that, because guilt and shame should not be tied to your sexuality. And when they are, they can contribute to that need for drugs, the drug use. So there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to take place when you're coming out of an addiction, when you're getting clean. I do recommend taking your time with it, because addiction and sobriety, getting clean, can take some time. So, it takes, like if you go to AA, for example, that they say don't get into a relationship with someone for at least a year. And that's great advice, but it doesn't work for everybody. But if we use kind of that same philosophy, we're sort of recognizing that we're rewiring our bodies as we come out of an addiction. And most addiction programs are like 30 days. But really, when we're rewiring our body to relearn anything, whether it be addiction, sexuality, anything, a divorce, a new job, give yourself time. Give yourself at least a year to recognize that it's going to take a little bit of time for you to separate the drug from your sexuality. But you can start doing the work immediately. Start developing a relationship with your sexuality. If you have a partner, it can be a little bit easier. You can bring them into the process and let them know, because your partner's going to want to be intimate with you. And if you're just kind of mindlessly having sex with your partner and you're trying to deal with your addiction over here and kind of doing it mindlessly, then your likelihood of relapse is greater, because you're going to need to have that sexual relationship with your partner. You may not need to, but you might want to figure out how to have some sort of connection with your partner. And you want it to be separated from the drug use. So you're going to need to help your partner, and your partner is going to need to help you figure out how to manage all of that. And slowly, deliberately make goals. In sex therapy, we often recommend something to take the pressure off. A lot of times we may recommend removing the genitals and removing the nipples from any of your intimate play. And this goes to a whole other topic of recognizing that intimate play doesn't need to have the genitals involved. We're very focused on the genitals in our society. We're very focused on whether or not our partner is hard or wet or lubricated, whether or not we have intercourse or penetration, and whether or not we orgasm. And those are, I've got several videos on that topic. Those are the X, Y, and Z if sex were an alphabet. There's all this other stuff that you should be doing to increase sex. So kind of going back to what we were talking about, responsive and spontaneous desire, you're going to start to learn how to grow and connect with that responsive desire part of yourself, because the spontaneous part is connected to the drug. So we're going to we're going to relearn and or learn how to engage with our responsive desire self. So I'm referring to the book Come As You Are, where Emily Nagoski talks about responsive desire and spontaneous desire. I'm saying that spontaneous desire happens when, more likely to happen when we're using some sort of drug, because our inhibition is decreased, as I mentioned in the beginning. So the goal with getting your sexuality back is reconnecting with your sexuality from a very young age. So we're going to go over all of the things that you learned, and you can do this on your own. Start journaling, start writing about the stories that you held on to as part of your journey through sexuality, and going to step by step relearn. Because a lot of the things that we learned were wrong, were misconceptions, were myths, were lies, were flat out blatant lies about masturbation, about sexual desire being a drive, a sex drive. All of these things that we've learned, as we start to unpack them, we relearn a new way of connecting with our sexuality. So that's what it's really going to take. If you sign up for my course, I give you a lot of really great worksheets and videos on how to step-by-step overcome that. And currently, that course is only $197. It's going to go up in 2022, so I really encourage you to buy that course now if it's something that interests you. If not, you can certainly do it on your own. There's so much great information out there. You can always go to a sex therapist. There is a lot of ways that you can reconnect to your sexual desire after overcoming an addiction. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm happy to provide more resources, and I'll link to all of the other videos here so that you can get kind of a bigger, broader picture. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.
The Sex Talk.